Welcome, everybody. Mainly good morning, seeing that most of the people are joining from the Netherlands, and good evening to those joining from the US. We received a couple emails from people, or sorry, not the US, Australia. I was going to say we received emails from people in the US who are not able to join because it's the middle of the night. Given that a lot of you are in the Netherlands, feel free to also add where from the Netherlands you're joining. We are very excited to welcome you to today's webinar about the Amsterdam Nieuwmarkt riots. Thank you all so much for joining us. And New Zealand, sorry, didn't want to exclude you when I mentioned Australia. I'm going to keep the introduction short so we get to the interesting part right away. I'm going to introduce our speakers and explain how this all came together. So Mark Ames is here today. He's a specialist in strategic engagement and communication for contentious city projects and the director of strategic cities in Sydney. He was one of the first graduates of the Urban Cycling Institute's Planning the Cycling City Summer School and in Amsterdam. And last year he returned to Amsterdam to spend time in the city's archives and research the Nieuwmarkt riots, to map how all the different stakeholders interacted and to uncover communication and engagement lessons for other cities. And with the riots reaching their 50-year anniversary this year, we decided to organize a webinar on that part of Amsterdam's history and what we can take away from it today. This also ties in very neatly with the Week van de Rechtvaardige Straat, which is taking place this week, or the Week of the Just Street in English, which is organized by the Lab of Thought, of which Marco de Bromelstroet is the academic director. He is also a professor in urban mobility futures at the University of Amsterdam. And together with Marco, Mark, and the Urban Cycling Institute, we put together this webinar today. And we are also very honored to be joined by Zomer Zeidelmaker, an urban historian focusing on the right to the city, working on a project on the Nieuwmarkt with Nieuwmarkt residents involved. We will start the webinar by Mark giving a presentation of his findings of the case study he conducted, and this will be followed by a short audience Q&A and reflections by Marco and by Zomer. So feel free to engage in the chat throughout the whole webinar, share questions, and we might ask a couple questions towards you. Yeah, my name is Lilian. This is Livy. We're joining from the Urban Cycling Institute side today, and we hope you enjoy the webinar. Mark, if you're ready, please feel free to kick off.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Lilian. And let me just get my screen up so that everyone can see what it is I'm going to talk about. Okay, great. Well, let's jump straight into things. Thank you, Lilian. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to start actually with a reflective exercise. I want you to close your eyes. Close your eyes and try and imagine Amsterdam. What can you see in your mind's eye? Is it beautiful canals and historic neighborhoods? Is it street life, cafe terraces, lots of people cycling around in a safe environment? Imagine the people of Amsterdam. What do they look like? Are they prosperous? Are they tolerant? Are they cooperative? All right, open your eyes. Did any of you see 4-lane highways? Did you see multi-story car parks or large modernist office blocks? In your mind's eye, could you see cars on every street? Did you see bulldozers and conflict and riots and tear gas? 50 years ago, Amsterdam was on a different path. The Newmarket riots, which we're going to look at today, were not just about a metro line. They were about who gets to decide what a city should be and how we as citizens collectively imagine the future. As Lilian kindly mentioned, I'm Mark Ames. I lead Strategic Cities, which is an engagement practice in Sydney, Australia, where I'm joining you from today. And full disclosure, I'm not a transport planner. I'm a specialist in strategic stakeholder engagement and communication for city changing projects. Changes to city streets seem to provoke the most emotional responses: petitions, press coverage, protests. And I'm particularly fascinated by how cities and their citizens engage and interact with each other in that dialogue that shapes place. And that interest led me back to Amsterdam last year to study the 1975 Newmarket riots in detail. And what I learned challenges dominant narratives about Amsterdam and also uncovered lessons for city makers today. So I'm really excited to share some of that experience with you. But first, a little bit of a history lesson. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1975, exactly 50 years ago today, in the Newmarket neighbourhood. Hundreds of police and members of the military are beating their way through the streets. There are protesters who've occupied the South Church of Amsterdam, and they're urgently ringing the bells of the church to summon other Amsterdammers to witness what is happening. Police charge, guard dogs bark, tear gas is fired, and an armoured vehicle, which looks a bit like a tank, smashes through somebody's home. The protesters, some of them hiding behind barricades of burnt out cars, tear up cobblestones, tear up parking meters, and throw them at the police. And the police beatings are severe. Many people are hospitalized. Reporters, photographers, and film crews capture the scene as clouds of blue tear gas drift across Amsterdam. There are staff from the city's municipal information office embedded in the neighbourhood and armed with a telex machine so that they can send urgent updates back to City Hall, which read, "At least 700 young men throwing paving stones fought their way against the jets of a water cannon as they threatened to break through the closed-off area of the Newmarket. Afraid the matter would get completely out of hand, the police chased the attackers back into the street with tear gas." Meanwhile, supporters of the protest have spread out across the city to hand out flyers to other Amsterdammers to try and drum up support. Their flyers say, "What is happening?" In recent times, the City Council have tried with all its means to slander, divide and conquer and break the tough resistance of the Newmarket neighbourhood. The city will try that again today and in the coming days. So we call on everyone to think carefully about what is now going on in your city and which side you choose in the matter of the metro and the opposition of the Newmarket neighbourhood. By the end of the 8th of April 1975, 50 years ago today, more than 2 weeks of rioting have left the Newmarket neighbourhood looking like a war zone. Tear gas canisters, torn banners, broken glass, debris, demolished buildings. As the protesters are pushed out, floodlights are put up and an enormous wrecking ball is brought in so that demolition of people's homes can immediately begin. This was the Newmarket riots. It's the story of a battle between the city of Amsterdam, who thought that they were planning the future, and its citizens who demanded dialogue. To understand these riots, we have to travel back in history and confront our preconception of Amsterdam as a just city and confront our preconception of Amsterdam as a city for people. If we start in 2022, here you can see the Newmarket Square with plenty of space for people. Here's that same location in 1975 with the same space being used actually as a car park. Here it is again during our riots with the police dressed in riot gear. And then here it is again, the same location in World War II, when that square was used as an impromptu prison to incarcerate Jewish Amsterdammers before they were sent to concentration camps and their death by the Nazis. Newmarket had been home to a very large Jewish community, but by the end of the Second World War, Amsterdam's Jewish population had decreased by 75%. And after liberation from the Nazis, of course, the winter of hunger gripped the Netherlands with really, really terrible shortages of both food and fuel. And in desperation, people scavenged firewood, including stripping wood from the abandoned Jewish homes, which caused many of them to collapse. In this way, more than 750 homes in the neighbourhood were destroyed, leaving the neighbourhood hollowed out, as you can see in this image. After the war, Amsterdam was remarkably run down and remarkably dilapidated, very different to the city that you see today, as a city councillor, Cees de Cloo, can explain. The neighbourhood decayed further. Vacancy rates grew and buildings were demolished. The exodus of people that were fed up with 50-metre square houses with their refrigerators in the living room and the toilet next to the kitchen continued. Since the 1930s, approaches to urban planning have undergone seismic shifts in Europe, and they've already reshaped Amsterdam. Modernist architects are pushing for what they call rational cities with strict functional segregation. So that's industry separated from homes and new and affordable homes with green space and sunlight all around them built on the outskirts of the city. The economic function of the old city would be increased at the expense of residents who lived there who were expected to move out to the suburbs. And in this way, entire blocks of old homes, small stores and workshops would be replaced with offices, commercial space and car parking. After the war, there's a housing crisis which really accelerates these plans, and several proposals are made to actually fill in several of Amsterdam's canals to make room for more cars. Here you can see those plans on the left and in the centre. The red lines are canals earmarked to be made roads. So a conversation about the future of Amsterdam has begun. In 1968, the City Council adopts their Plan Stadspoor, a plan to create a network of metro lines across the city and a network of highways across and through the city. And the council commit to building satellite suburbs on the edges of Amsterdam, which will be connected by roads and rail. So confident are they that the city sends a briefing to every resident in Amsterdam, which you can see on the right-hand side. And that briefing assures them that roads, rail, and suburbia are the future. And through the power of the archive, we can visit one of those suburbs now.
Amsterdam, Bijlmermeer. Een gebied voor 100.000 mensen met industrie en kantoren, voor recreatie en voor verkeer.
All a working man needs to do is leave his apartment, walk to the parking garage connected to his high-rise, and get into his car. He can do all of this without getting hit by a single drop of rain. We've designed a place that gives you all the benefits of density without the penalties.
90.000 mensen in de Bijlmermeer hebben 450 hectare recreatiegrond. Met 10.000 bomen, 2 miljoen heesters, 250 hectare gazon, 25 hectare speelplaats en waterpartijen.
As that new suburb is built in the south, construction of a metro line to connect it to the north begins and progresses northwards towards the Nieuwmarkt. But the metro line engineers are not able to tunnel through Amsterdam's boggy terrain. Instead, they build 40-metre long concrete boxes on the surface and then sink them into the ground and connect them to form a line and to form a tunnel. To do this requires demolishing 200-metre long sections of the city at a time, and that includes people's homes. And after the demolition, a highway and offices are built on top of the cleared space. This means that huge swathes of the tightly packed Nieuwmarkt neighbourhood will be destroyed, and this rapid change sparks alarm. The artist and critic Geert Brinkgrieve, who is pictured here, has already been rallying support for historical preservation in Amsterdam, and he becomes a key voice in Amsterdam's discourse. He appeals to something called the Amsterdam Circle, which is a group of highly influential civic leaders, and they establish a heritage committee which comprises a former mayor, architects, academics, and journalists. This influential group shifts the focus away from trying to save individual buildings and towards trying to save entire neighborhoods. And in that way, Amsterdam's Stadsherstel, the Preservation Society, is founded. And they say, no longer the single interesting building in itself, but the house as part of a block, of a neighbourhood, indeed of the entire old city with its own structure and proportions. And this means a turnaround from incidental house restoration to city restoration as the ultimate goal. At the same time, Amsterdam has famously become Europe's countercultural capital. In 1969, John Lennon and Yoko Ono staged their famous bed-in at the Hilton Hotel. And the Provos, a satirical anarchist group, provoke the city council with radical acts. For example, they turn a barge on one of the canals into a marijuana farm. They organize protests against traffic. They publish very creative and subversive materials. And they also launch a now infamous free bike sharing scheme to challenge the dominance of cars. The bicycle is both nothing and something, they claim. Later on, a member of the Provos, Mr. Rob Stolk, publishes a handbook or a guide for squatters. And that guide has a list of vacant buildings in the neighbourhood and instructions, a literal how-to on picking locks, repairing toilets, and becoming a good neighbour. And their motto is occupy a building, save a building. So as residents move out to the suburbs, squatters move in, take over, and eventually form the Newmarket Neighbourhood Action Group. When we think of squatters, it would be a mistake to assume that they and the action group that they formed with residents was comprising of disorderly dropouts and hippies. Actually, the squatters are exceptionally well organised. They organise communal childcare, they build a community centre, they produce a neighbourhood newsletter, they take over this bar, and they organise a roster of street parties. I have to say, they sound like the kind of neighbours that I would like to have. One of those squatters was a gentleman called Mr. Hype Morel, and he tells us exactly how it was to be in the neighbourhood at that time. It was a strong and disciplined group. When inhabitants left the area, it was up to us to squat their buildings quickly and offer them to people who wanted to live there, to put energy into refurbishing it, and who were willing to take part in actions for conservation. And so we see many voices beginning to challenge the viewpoint of the city. The action group launch a radio station. They distribute posters. They create the Metro Rat, who you can see here, this grotesque caricature of corruption and collusion. They spray walls in the neighborhood with the slogan, not tunnels, houses. And they also engage directly with City Hall and with the democratic process. They launch petitions, they propose alternatives, they infiltrate committees, and they challenge the underlying assumptions of the Metro project. And some of these voices that we see emerging are actually quite surprising. The leading structuralist architect, Aldo van Eyck, has been commissioned by the city of Amsterdam to redesign the Newmarket after the metro has been built. And part of the brief is that UvA, the university, want a 300-metre long office block and a very big car park. And the council, as the client, are shocked when Van Eyck tells them that cars and traffic will be a disaster for the neighbourhood, and he walks out of the project in protest. And the voice of preservation continues as well. Gert Brinkgrieve has identified a significant historic house in the Newmarket, the Pinto House, which at this stage is dilapidated and waiting demolition. But Brinkgrieve understands that the facade, the front of the Pinto House, actually dictates the curve or the line of the road at the beginning of the Newmarket. And he realizes that if the Pinto House can be saved, it will stop the highway. So he adopts the tactics of the action group and he squats the house while simultaneously demanding that the city save it. And his move is decisive. It forces the city to revisit their plans for the neighbourhood and reconsider their plans for the highway. And a vote is tabled to cancel the highway. 22 councillors say no. 23 3 councillors say yes, so just 1 vote stops that highway. But plans for the metro continue. And within City Hall itself, there is division among public servants. The Department of Public Works wants to pull down the Pinto House brick by brick and move it somewhere else. The Department of Monuments absolutely refuse. So to control the narrative, the city centralizes communication. For example, staff are entirely banned from talking to the media, and a round-the-clock communications team is embedded in the Newmarket neighbourhood with their telex and a radio car, which was the height of cutting-edge technology at that time. And tensions within the Newmarket neighbourhood are unfolding within a broader national and indeed global context. In 1973, the oil crisis paralyses Dutch life. Petrol is rationed, Sundays go car-free, Amsterdammers reclaim streets with bikes and picnics on highways. And that year, parents across Holland launch Stop the Child Murder, protesting child traffic deaths with die-ins and protests. In 1974, several Amsterdam neighbourhood groups get together with the provost and other activists and rally thousands of people in the city calling for cars to be deprioritised and pushed out of the city centre. Meanwhile, a right-wing extremist group tries to plant a bomb under a metro station near the Bijlmermeer housing estate. These right-wing extremists hate the provost, they hate the Newmarket Action Group, and they hate the influence that they have on council. And their aim is to cast doubt on the Newmarket Action Group as if it was them who'd actually planted the bomb. And this works. The mayor of Amsterdam does indeed assume that the bomb had been set by Newmarket protesters and denounces them. So trust between the city and the neighbourhood at that point completely collapses and halts dialogue between the two parties. A last-ditch vote to try and cancel the metro is tabled and then rejected. Within days, forced evictions and demolitions have begun within the Newmarket. The remaining squatters and residents fortify their homes, literally fortify where they live. They brick up windows, they weld the doors of their houses shut. And they only come out for protests across the city where they urge other Amsterdammers to support them. They shout, "Amsterdam, help the Newmarket," as they try to frame their struggle as a citywide issue. The next morning, police and military move into the neighbourhood armed with batons and dogs and tear gas. Squatters and the residents push back. The riot begins. So what happened next? Well, ultimately, the democratic process endured. It was a vote that cancelled the highway, and it was a vote that continued the metro and evicted the homes. But significant concessions were achieved by the people who opposed the city's plans. Plans for large offices and parking garages and the highway was scrapped, and the neighbourhood was rebuilt along its original road layout. More homes, including social housing, were built instead, including by Aldo van Eyck, the architect. He built Het Pentagon, which is an exemplary building you can see in the image on the right. Geert Brinkgreaves Stadsherstel saved and restored the Pinto House, which is now a community centre. And in 2017, a canal bridge in the Newmarket was named in Brinkgreaves' honour, which is a very great honour. And the Stadsherstel continues to restore old buildings in Amsterdam and leases more than 900 of them as homes. But the waiting list to move into one is several years long. So Amsterdam's housing crisis persists. The metro opened in 1980, and Newmarket Station features enormous artworks which commemorate the riots, including a metal wrecking ball swinging above the train tracks. The city ultimately completely abandoned its planned Stadspoor, and the first railways, then roads approach that plan included. No metro lines were built for 20 years, and the Weesperstraat highway was never completed. This monument marks the spot where it was stopped. However, change remains challenging. In 2023, a trial by the city to reduce car traffic by snipping or cutting the Weesperstraat, the very same highway which follows the line of the metro to the Nieuwmarkt, a trial to reduce traffic there was abandoned by the city after a backlash. Union concerns about delays to emergency services and furious drivers from out of town all made headlines in the media. Indeed, reports even emerged of local residents throwing traffic cones and bollards into the canals. So the dialogue between Amsterdam and Amsterdammers about their future continues. From an engagement and communication perspective, I find the Nieuwmarkt riots really striking. Firstly, because that a city infrastructure project could cause a riot is still shocking 50 years later. And because also the riots challenge Amsterdam's image as a just and people-first city, which is immune to top-down planning. And the usual framing of the riots, radicals versus authority, is very compelling. We even use that frame to publicize this webinar, but the historical record actually tells a much richer story. Residents, squatters, preservationists, architects, engineers, and civic leaders all participated in the dialogue about the city and all helped to shape the outcome. In fact, even at one point, the Queen of the Netherlands came out and supported the restoration of the Pinto House. My research has led me to reflect on the theme of relative truth in city dialogues. The philosopher Foucault argues that truth is not universal, but it's shaped by those who are in power. So, were the metro plans really progress, or were they just positioned that way by the city? If they were progress, who were they progress for? Was this a neutral vision of the future, or did it reinforce a hierarchy? Truth and our reality are also constructed through our interactions, both with power, but also with media and discourse with our neighbours. So the action groups, posters and radio station and newsletters, plus the media coverage of their action, really formed a competing network of narratives. And I think both the city and the action group understood that. They both nominated spokespeople to give their version of events and to control the narrative while shaping other people's perceptions about that debate. And in that debate, in that discourse, frames are important. Were these rioters, aggressive, or protesters, or defenders? Were they radicals, or were they proponents of common sense? So what does all of this mean for cities today, and indeed cities where you work? Well, Amsterdam, the city of Amsterdam, imposed a really grand narrative of progress, an overarching version of reality. But that was less powerful than the lived experience and the small local truths of the Nieuwmarkt residents, which proved to be ultimately more persuasive. The action group's message of "Help us, Amsterdam" linked their local struggle to many broader urban contexts. So their localized truth, amplified by wider concerns, directly challenged the official top-down story. So I'm led to a position that if no single truth exists, then a city's meta-narrative is actually simply competing stories, many competing stories, shaped by social positions and perspectives. And the Nieuwmarkt was ultimately a battle of those narratives, a battle around who gets to define what is right for the city, who gets to define what is right for your city. I mentioned last year I was fortunate to spend a lot of time in Amsterdam in the archive researching this project, and we published an in-depth case study about the riots. You can scan this QR code to get this copy. It's easy to read and maps out how all the primary actors engaged. And I hope that the story of the Nieuwmarkt encourages you to reflect on the stories indeed of your own city and of your own practice. Thank you very much for coming today and for your attention. And I can't wait to get stuck into the discourse and the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. This was very, very insightful. I really appreciate your presentation. And I feel like you did a very good job at bringing together different points in this story to a kind of coherent, or as coherent as this can be,
My
story
pleasure.
that happened. We didn't see, or I didn't see the QR code, but we're going to make sure to post a link in the chat on how you can get the case study. Yeah, okay, someone else said they couldn't see the QR code. There have been some questions in the chat, and one of them is quite a big question, I would say. You started reflecting on that at the end of your presentation when you talked about cities' meta-narratives and the competing network of narratives. Was it just common sense or something else? So someone asked, how does one distinguish good protests from reactionary, fake nostalgia-fueled ones? In other words, when is modernism a force for good? When isn't it? And who decides that?
Wow, that's a really great question. And I imagine there are some architectural theorists who are probably better qualified to answer that than I am. But actually, this is something I talk to with my clients all the time. If you are the proponent of change rather than the opposition to change, it's really important that you can delineate between just reactionary feedback and useful feedback. And sometimes I actually think that in city dialogues, any feedback is perceived to be negative or problematic and kind of gets shut down quite quickly, when actually, if the Newmarket teaches us anything, is that it really should be a much more involved dialogue to push cities forward. There's no such thing anymore as an absolute vision in cities. Every project, whether it's a housing development or something as big as a metro line, involves trade-offs. So yeah. But Marco and Zamra may also have perspectives on that.
Yeah, maybe we will keep it at one question for now. There's one very important question in the chat that is, are there any similar stories around the world with similar lasting impact on city transport planning? And I think we would love to throw that question back at everyone who is joining this webinar. We would love to hear from you if this has made you think of any social movements, current or historical, in your city, in your place, in the context where you are living in currently. And with that, I would love to pass the mic to Zomer for your reflections on the Nieuwmarkt and what Mark has just talked about.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Zomer. I'm an urban historian. And 2 weeks ago, I held an event in the Nieuwmarkt neighborhood. And this event was really a remembrance together with older residents of the neighborhood that have been there for the past 50 years and more, as well as newer and younger residents of the Nieuwmarkt that may not know that much about their own neighborhood. And I want to thank Mark for this amazing story, which he told very quickly. I don't think I could have done that because it's such a rich history. And because you've already touched upon so many really important details, I thought I would just recount some of the things that the residents have told me that they felt was really important during these riots, which the first thing is very important, that all these people will tell you it was not a riot. They get very passionate about this word and not using this word. And what they all told us at this event was that for them it's really important to acknowledge that the history of the Nieuwmarkt, like Mark also touched upon, started much earlier. It was really left in very bad shape after the Second World War, but squatting started 10 years before these events in 1975. And what all these squatters that are now elderly residents really told us is to please remember all the love, the care, and the community that went into this neighborhood, and that also resulted in these fights because people were fighting for their right to stay in their place, for the right for their community to really stay in the space that they created themselves in absence of the government and support of the government. So I just wanted to share very shortly a few things. Let's see. Because Mark also showed a photo So I just wanted to share it as well. And this is a cafe, Metro Café Het Hoekje Om, around the corner. This was actually not squatted, this cafe. It was there for a long time already. And it was owned by Tina Hofman, elderly resident already in the 70s. And once it was officially closed down, because it was going to be demolished for the metro and the highway, she reopened it, kind of as a neighborhood, a community area. So officially it was squatted, but it was still her cafe. And I just want to show a picture of her because the residents at the event 2 weeks ago said that she has been very, very important in this movement. She was an elderly resident. And she really was the voice of the community and someone who really held together these residents, the monument caretakers, the squatters, because she cared so much for this place where she grew up and lived all her life. And this really gives a much more human touch to the story that really shows this love and the sense of community that also resulted in the anger that you saw in these fights 50 years ago. The event was held in de Smederij, which was a squatted space, which was also used as a community space. So here you see in 1971 it was squatted. And then they actually held a big community event for the elderly residents to celebrate together that there was still a Nieuwmarkt neighborhood. And this really shows the level of collaboration of all the people. And then you see a few years later, they're discussing how are we going to do it with these planned evictions. Because people were very stressed about this, of course. I think what I just want to share from the point of the residents is that with calling it riots, you really make invisible this human aspect of it. And on their behalf, I would say it was much more than riots. It's a fight for their rights to have their community in the place they created themselves. So that's what I would like to add.
Zamra, that's a fantastic reflection. And actually, I agree. I think what I learned from going through the record is just how broad the dialogue was and how resident first the actions were. Even actually the kind of the more radical element of the squatters really prioritized the voices of the residents. And I think this made them distinct from maybe other kind of social movement groups at the time. You know, for example, the anti-Vietnam War movement, which were kind of dealing with abstract issues which were external. The residents were really pushed forward. And that's the first time I've seen that color photo of the local residents dancing in the Smederij. So that was a highlight for me. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your insights and kind of the neighborhood and aspect of care in the whole movement and the reflection of that it was not, or that riot might not be the best way to call it. I would say we move into Marco's presentation slowly. And maybe before we do that, I would like to encourage the people joining the webinar to think about how likely and how urgent you think such a social movement is today. Feel free to rate that on a scale and just paste it in the chat, how likely and how urgent such a movement is today in your city or in your context. And with that, I would like to pass it on to you, Marco.
Thank you, Lilian. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Zomer, for this fascinating insight in, as we saw in the chat, not many people know about, and which was so crucial for the history of Amsterdam as we know it today, the history of other Dutch cities, and maybe even the history of our discussions about urban developments everywhere around the world. So that was very, very inspiring. My little take on this is comes more from an academic perspective. So I will test out the technical limits of Teams by also showing a short video clip. And it's a video clip about the window of Overton, because what I saw, and actually was mentioned very clearly also by Mark, is that it was not a a violent riot. It was, and as we know from Zomer, there was much more happening in the background as well. But I really like the idea that it was especially a fight about imaginaries, narratives, imagination of how the city or what the city is all about. And the theoretical framework that I used to try to understand that is called the window of Overton. I just want to share a short clip with you explaining what this window means, but also what it might mean if that window closes, and it might not even exist at this point. So let me see if I can make this work. Wait, I have to go to the right screen here. There we go.
The Overton window is an approach describing the range of views and ideas currently acceptable and tolerable by societies whilst excluding those commonly considered as radical or absurd. Overton claimed that whether a political idea is feasible or not doesn't depend on the beliefs of politicians implementing it, but rather on the fit within the range of socially acceptable ideas. Over time, this window can move, expand, or shrink to either embrace or exclude newer and newer ideas. It occurs under the natural influence of the public opinion in circumstances such as crises or gradual cultural changes. However, it can also be the result of premeditated manipulation. Politicians with an agenda to introduce a then radical idea will begin by shifting the Overton window enough so the idea can be discussed without a public outrage, thus allowing the society to become gradually acquainted with it and not dismissing the idea altogether. A common way of manipulating the Overton window is proposing an idea absurd enough for people to reject it, but even by doing so, their mindset is broadened just enough to accept some less radical concepts, thus shifting the range of the acceptable. Those who want to influence society will also likely try to change the size of the window, even if it means shrinking it. As Noam Chomsky puts it, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate.
So my argument would be that what happened in the 1970s in the Netherlands was a radical re-widening of the window of Overton of our conversation of what cities are about, what streets are about, and what mobility systems are about. And my position in this is that I think after 1977 or 1975, so 50 years ago, over that time, most of those radical voices have disappeared from the debate. And actually, you could say that this is a deliberate strategy in the Dutch context of how we run politics. The famous Dutch polder model makes radical voices, makes them sit on the table and become part of the discussion of experts. But as Noam Chomsky here indicates, that might mean that we are limiting the spectrum of the conversation that we need to have. So the question that I want to pose here is: do we still have that freedom of thinking that can shift the window of Overton, or are those voices now disappearing? And one indication that I think it is disappearing, that what we see currently is that if there is a deputy mayor presenting relatively progressive plans for the streets, we see that they are positioned as radical. And I think one reason why this is possible is because there are no real radical ideas anymore, and that means that the positioning that a deputy mayor can take becomes in itself limited. So those are my ideas on this. I have some concern, I would say, about the current urgency and opportunities to have similar types of debates than we had in the 1970s. And I look forward to hear your thoughts about how we can actually manage to improve that situation. Thanks.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you to everyone sharing their experiences, remarks, and questions in the chat. we have some time to direct some of the questions to Mark, Marco, and Zomer. So feel free to continue asking questions. And I would like to ask you, Mark. Felix asked, how can we facilitate citizen engagement into the process of infrastructure development? Would you like to share your thoughts on that?
How can we facilitate community and citizen engagement on infrastructure projects is a really interesting question. This is a huge landscape, and to respond to Marco's concerns about sort of like, do we have the ability to do this on a radical scale in our citizens today? Actually, the landscape is so huge and so detailed and so unwieldy that one of the challenges that citizenries have is the challenge of capacity. Like, who has got the time to be deeply involved in these projects? And that, unfortunately, is where politics comes in and where it's important, because established political leaders can set a vision, and then it's up to the engineers to then deal with the detail. What I think we see currently happening, certainly in the West, I can't speak for other societies around the world, but in Europe, in Britain, in Australia, I guess in America, I don't want to talk about it, but in the places that I'm familiar with, what we see is that actually it is the politicians who kind of expend the most capital to deliver a project. As Marco said, they become the radical voice. And actually, I think this is kind of topsy-turvy. It doesn't really work. I think that the community has to be ahead of the political body, demanding what they want, and then that creates the space for the politician to respond to. And that's something I see less and less and less of. And that's something that kind of keeps me up at night as someone who's very engaged in this landscape. I don't think there's the kind of the edge of the conversation pushing further out in the positive direction. And I don't think that there's a lot of capacity in society these days. Everyone's kind of pressed for time.
Thank you, Mark. I would also like to direct a question to you, Zomer, but also possibly to you, Marco. As you've spoken to residents of the Nieuwmarkt in the last weeks, I would like to direct this question to you. Has that community organizing spirit and structure endured today? Have they shaped or influenced other issues in this neighborhood or in the city more broadly?
Thank you for the question. I saw it already. I would say that the community spirit is definitely still there today. The neighborhood is quite active. They have a pretty vibrant community center. They have their own, their own newspaper. In the summer, you have the Wallen Festival, which is really nice. Everyone can visit, but it really shows the community because these are neighbors and also stores, for example, that work together to just really create an inviting space and have people learn about the neighborhoods. And I think, there's definitely still community feeling, but you do see a divide in the older generation residents, for example, these residents that are now elderly, that squatted in the 70s, and the newer residents, because like much of the country, a lot of social housing is being sold. You also see this in the Nieuwmarkt neighborhoods. People feel really sour about this really hard fought for social housing, that it is being sold. And you also see that with the ground prices, a lot of Amsterdam residents can no longer afford to move back there. So you see a lot of expats moving in. And this does create friction because these two groups have trouble connecting to each other. Some of the elderly residents also may not speak English as well. So there is actually, in this sense, also issues to really connect. But this is something that I want to work on because following our event, we also want to do memory walks with residents. And we hope to connect older and newer residents together for these walks where they can talk about their experiences in the neighborhood. But there is definitely some friction at this moment, but you do see this, I think, in most Amsterdam neighborhoods at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. The memory walks sound like a very interesting project to kind of move this forward. Marco, thank you for sharing the Mentimeter. Please feel free to scan the QR code. And at the moment, it looks like most people say that this is very unlikely, but very urgent. And with that, I would also like to ask you the question, Marco, asked by Rebecca. How do you think a place like Amsterdam can reintroduce radical voices and ideas?
Yeah, I agreed. I'm very cynical about that, because also indeed, if you look at all these underlying forces of how many people are actually still feeling that they are inhabitants of the city center, for instance, or even you can expand that to a larger area in cities like Amsterdam. It's less and less so that people feel engaged. Secondly, I think, but that's especially something for the Western European context, is that many people feel comfortable relatively. Until recent events, I think most people in the Netherlands felt that there wasn't a very urgent reason to have such a movement. You see the aggressive response against Extinction Rebellion that are daring to block people in cars on highways, and there seems to be again quite a majority vote against those things. One of the interesting things, though, is, and I also shared it in the chat already, is that we studied together with Ian Walker the psychology of this, and we find that there is actually a large majority, about 70% of people, that support progressive changes to our streets. But the weird thing is, if you ask them if they think that many other people would support them, they perceive themselves as a minority, and that's one of the lessons I saw in the presentation by Mark. One thing that I learned from the story of the 70s is that one way to overcome that is to link the stories. But it's not one story, because on one story, on one dimension, you often feel like you're this crazy minority radical. But once you connect them, so it's no longer only about housing, it's also about mobility, it's the rights of children, it's about health. I think connecting those stories into one story might be the way to show people that they are actually a majority. And two short examples. One is, I think, that works a lot, that works very powerfully in the Netherlands right now. There are several municipalities that follow the principles of the Just Street, so our manifest on the Rechtvaardige Straat, and created a new mobility vision, not around optimizing the system or slightly shifting people from one mode to the other, but instead focusing on the rights of children at the age of 8 to move through the city independently. And each city that did that, so far there are 3 cities that dared to do that, are surprised by the unanimousness of the vote in favor of it. So you see that if you develop that story, suddenly many perceived differences between people disappear, because we all feel that our children are facing big physical, mental, and social health problems. So that can be a very interesting narrative that connects all these things, right? Because it's not only about mobility, of course, it's about many other things. And secondly, I think that's what I tried to do with the Lab of Thought, is we need to create the leniency and the agility as a group of people that's actually present here, to keep on developing new stories. Not anti-car, pro-bike, or whatever, but we need to be much more agile to connect the things that we want, and that often involves cycling or anti-car measures, but that's a means. So we need to talk about the goals, because if we manage to do that, I think we can learn from the 70s. We will find that there's huge support for progressive changes. And that can help to shift this, because I see that many people here agree, which is very problematic, right? So if we are in the quadrant of very urgent and very unlikely, we need to find strategies to get out. And some people are elsewhere, so maybe it's for them especially interesting to respond in the chat why they see this differently. Maybe we can learn from that.
I would echo very strongly Marco's first point about the importance of narrative frames. It's something that absolutely came up in my research at the Nieuwmarkt, and it's something that comes up all the time in my practice as well. And it's come up in this lecture. You know, I would hazard a guess that the majority of you online thought today that you were attending a webinar about cycling. This is, of course, the Urban Cycling Institute, but as we saw, and as Marco just said, it was about urban planning, it was about economy, it was about quality of life and how long your commute's going to be to the dreary suburb, and perhaps most compelling, it was about what kind of city is this going to be in the future for our children. My clients all the time, I say, you must evoke the spirit of Whitney Houston. I believe that children are the future, because it's really compelling. So maybe let's stop talking about push bikes and start talking about a much wider frame. And I guess my second point to reflect on that is I'm conscious that to be a protester in the same way that these people in the 70s were is quite challenging today. Certainly in Australia and the UK, there are very significant legal penalties if you do something like go and close down a motorway. However, there are no penalties from simply starting with the question, why, about projects. Why is this project happening? Why are you putting this parking here? Or why are you cutting down this tree? Or why are you building a freeway? And I think that's really, it seems very simple. It seems overly simple, but I think that's a really interesting way to start unlocking a discourse, which is much wider than just you, but also getting people who are practitioners, road builders or city makers, to actually reflect on their own practice. My experience sometimes is when you ask people, why is this happening? They don't actually know. So yeah, start with why.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much again to Mark and Marco and Zomer for sharing your views and your insights and bringing together different views and different voices. Thank you also so much to everyone who participated so actively in the chat.